Greetings and welcome back to Room 303, Senior A English. We are finishing our study of Shakespeare's Macbeth, and we are addressing now another work of literary criticism. We're going to be looking at Frank Kermode's From Macbeth from Shakespeare's Language on page 390. Before we go there, though, let's just make sure we know a little bit about Frank Kermode on page 385. The dates, 1919 to 2010, a literary critic who wrote in-depth analysis of works ranging from the Bible to those of Shakespeare and beyond. He was a former professor of modern English at University College London and was knighted by Queen Elizabeth in 1991. Now, about this cutting, in this essay, Frank Kermode will explore the concept of time in the tragedy of Macbeth. We've obviously spoken quite a bit about this already. We're going to now look at a literary critic talk about it. Much of the play is driven by concerns about the future, its uncertainty and its ambiguity. This piece of literary criticism is a prime example of the ideas found in Kermode's Shakespeare's Language, in which he explores how audiences since Shakespeare's time have found meaning in the playwright's intricate poetic language. Note that Kermode follows British spelling conventions, for instance, his spelling of behavior, and cites line numbers that may differ from those that appear in the version of Macbeth, the play presented earlier in this unit. As is common in scholarly works, the author has included citations and commentary in the form of footnotes. All right, we're going to turn now to page 390. Just as we did with the Brooks critical literary criticism analysis essay, here, we're going to pay close attention to the language that the critic will use. And just to scan, we've got 10 paragraphs, but notice several of these paragraphs are quite long. So we really want to pay close attention as professional reader now will read for us.
From Macbeth, from Shakespeare's Language, by Frank Kermode. Literary criticism. Looking at it from a distance, we can see that the distinctive character of the language of Macbeth is largely dictated by its structure. From the first suggestion of a plot on Duncan's life until his murder, the play exists in a world of nightmare doubt and decision, to kill or not to kill. As Thomas de Quincey expressed it in his superb essay on the knocking at the gate in Macbeth, the knocking makes it known that the reaction has commenced. The human has made its reflex upon the fiendish. The pulses of life are beginning to beat again, and the reestablishment of the goings-on of the world in which we live makes us profoundly sensible of the awful parenthesis that had suspended them. Or one could cite Brutus's soliloquy in Julius Caesar. Between the acting of a dreadful thing and the first motion, all the interim is like a phantasma, or a hideous dream. Act 2, Scene 1, lines 63 through 65. The action before the murder is situated in this interim. Macbeth himself uses the word in Act 1, Scene 3, line 154. And the verse is designed to match the terrible and uncertain decisions that occupy it. The play as a whole is greatly preoccupied with time. The show of kings itself covers many generations, and there is lasting concern about lineal descendants. Macbeth fearing that whereas he has no prospect of dynastic successors, Banquo has, a difference underlined by the weird sisters. The way to succeed Duncan was to kill him. The way to prevent the succession of Banquo's heirs was to kill both Banquo and Fleance. In both cases, it was necessary to consider interference with the future as the sisters foresaw it. So, in the early part of the play, the verse is full of equivocations about the present and the future, as forecast by the gnomic sayings of the three sisters. Their opening lines represent a new departure, for they tell us nothing directly about the subject of the play, speaking only of the future as perceived from the present. When shall we three meet again? In thunder, lightning, or in rain? Offers an apparent choice of weathers that is not a choice at all, which partly prefigures the plight of Macbeth and suggests a vain selection of some aspects of futurity at the expense of others not mentioned. Fine weather, for instance. The answer to these questions is, when the hurly-burly's done, when the battle's lost and won. Hurleys and burleys go together like thunder and lightning. Won battles are also lost. So we have false antitheses, ghostly choices, an ironic parody of human powers of prediction. Fair is foul, and foul is fair, is a paradox echoed by Macbeth in the first line he speaks. Act 1, Scene 3, line 38. In his mouth, the words may be taken at face value, as referring to the bad weather on one hand and the pleasures of victory on the other. The sisters' use of the idea is darker and more complex. Perhaps what strikes them as fair is what to others would be foul. A crown got by crime, for instance. The paradox is oracular. Oracles are traditionally equivocal. Macbeth is a play of prophecy focused, with great concentration on the desire to feel the future in the instant, to be transported beyond the ignorant present. When Macbeth asks the sisters, "What are you?" Act 1, Scene 3, line 47, their reply is to tell him what he will be. The present is the long interim between thought and act, an interim that disappears when Macbeth decides to let the firstlings of his heart become the firstlings of his hand. To crown my thoughts with acts, be it thought and done. Act 4, Scene 1, line 149. The first part of the play is set in a time when there is still a gap between the thought and the deed, and its language enacts this dizzying gap. Here, perhaps more than in any other of Shakespeare's plays, an idiosyncratic rhythm and a lexical habit establish themselves with a sort of hypnotic firmness. Lost and won, say the sisters at the beginning of the first scene. What he hath lost, noble Macbeth hath won, says Duncan at the end of the second, having just before that rhymed Macbeth with death. These moments of ingrown self-illusion contrast with the old-style rant of the bleeding sergeant. The scene in which Macbeth and Banquo encounter the sisters, Act 1, Scene 3, fully exhibits the new and peculiar ambiguous doubling manner. Are these figures inhabitants of the earth or not? Men or women? Alive or not? They reply with their prophecy. He is already Glamis, will be Cawdor, will be king. Banquo answers with questions to Macbeth. Why does he fear what seems so fair? Then he addresses the sisters. Are ye fantastical, or that indeed, which outwardly ye show? Lines 53 through 54. Are you what you appear to be, or mere apparitions? Why do you speak to him, and not to me? If you can look into the seeds of time, and say which grain will grow, and which will not, speak then to me, who neither beg nor fear your favors, nor your hate. Lines 58 through 61. Here the rhythms reinforce the return to the original question. What can be known of the future in the present? Him/me, grow/not grow, beg/fear, favors/hate. Even when they are not, as it were, necessary, part of the substance, the oppositions and alternatives sound on continually. Lesser than Macbeth and greater, not so happy yet much happier. Thou shalt get kings, though thou be none. Lines 65 through 67. Macbeth calls the sisters imperfect speakers, line 70, meaning that what they say is not complete enough to be understood or to satisfy him, but they vanish, leaving their imperfect speeches to be completed according to taste. Your children shall be kings, you shall be king, line 86. The self-same tune is now repetitively in our ears. When Ross confirms Macbeth's appointment as Thane of Cawdor, Banquo's reaction is to ask, "What, can the devil speak true?" Line 107. And Macbeth begins the famous sequence of allusions to borrowed or ill-fitting garments. Why do you dress me in borrowed robes? Lines 108 and 109. Banquo repeats the figure almost immediately, lines 144 through 146. Here, these robes, if borrowed, must be on loan from the future, and they confirm a devil's prophecy, although the fiend, as a rule, lies like truth. Act 5, Scene 5, line 43. Banquo fears that this truth has been told to do harm. The instruments of darkness tell us truths, win us with honest trifles to betrays in deepest consequence. Act 1, Scene 3, lines 124 through 126. And Macbeth, contemplating a future in which he may have to murder in order to fulfill the prophecy of kingship, speaks a long aside which now completely establishes the rhythm of the interim. This supernatural soliciting cannot be ill, cannot be good. If ill, why hath it given me earnest of success, commencing in a truth? I am fain of Cawdor. If good, why do I yield to that suggestion, whose horrid image doth unfix my hair, and make my seated heart knock at my ribs, against the use of nature? Present fears are less than horrible imaginings. My thought, whose mirther yet is but fantastical, shakes so my single state of man that function is smothered in surmise, and nothing is but what is not. Lines 130 through 142. The tempting promise of the sisters, here compacted in the sinister phrase, supernatural soliciting, seems good in so far as it began with a now undoubted truth. It seems bad in that the temptation to murder induces in him an unnatural fear and brings up the image of a dead king. These fears arise from something less than the horrors would be if they were actual. Yet they are already actual enough to shake him terribly. He is rapt, line 142. His ordinary behavior forgotten in thoughts of that imagined future action. Nothing is but what is not. That is, the present is no longer present. The unacted future has occupied its place. These difficult thoughts all turn on the incantatory rhythm of cannot be ill, cannot be good, and of nothing is but what is not, as indeed will much of the verse from this point on until Duncan is dead. More than any other play, Macbeth dwells on this moment of crisis, a moment that seems exempt from the usual movement of time, when the future is crammed into the present. St. Augustine wrote about such a moment, the gap between desire and act. Though he was certain of the end desires, he was at strife with himself. The choices to be made were all meeting together in the same juncture of time. He said to himself, "Be it done now, be it done now." But he continued to hesitate between fair and foul, crying, how long, tomorrow and tomorrow? This, for Macbeth, as for the saint, is the moment when the soul distends itself to include past and future. Throughout the early scenes, we are being prepared for the astonishingly original verse of the great soliloquy in Act 1, Scene 7. On many occasions, Shakespeare, needing a simple expression, cannot avoid complicating it, as if by an excess of energy, but they should be distinguished from passages in which that energy is fully and properly employed. And one of the greatest of these is Macbeth's soliloquy at the beginning of Act 1, Scene 7. If it were done, when 'tis done, then 'twere well. It were done quickly, if the assassination could trammel up the consequence, and catch with his surcease success, that but this blow might be the be-all and the end-all, here. But here, upon this bank and shoal of time, we'll jump the life to come. But in these cases we still have judgment here, that we but teach bloody instructions, which, being taught, we turn to plague the inventor. This even-handed justice commends the ingredients of our poisoned chalice to our own lips. He's here in double trust. First, as I am his kinsman and his subject, strong both against the deed, then as his host, who should against his murderer shut the door, not bear the knife myself. Besides, this Duncan hath borne his faculties so meek, hath been so clear in his great office, that his virtues will plead like angels, trumpet-tongued against the deep damnation of his taking off, and pity, like a naked newborn babe, striding the blast, or heaven's cherubim, oars upon the sightless couriers of the air, shall blow the horrid deed in every eye, that tears shall drown the wind. I have no spur to prick the sides of my intent, but only vaulting ambition, which o'erleaps itself and falls on the other. Lines 1 through 28. The passage is famous, and so are some examples of interpretive criticism it has attracted. Like St. Augustine, Macbeth has to consider what is implied by his need to do in order to possess what is by that act done. The triple repetition of done gives a fairly commonplace, even proverbial saying an intense local force. If the murder could of its own power prevent all that follows such a deed, if Duncan's death could put an end not only to him, but to all that would follow it, then at this stationary moment in time, he would jump the life to come, risk consequences in another life. But paraphrase of this sort entirely misses the force of surcease, success, a compaction of language into what has been called a seesaw rhythm. That is the motto rhythm of the great interim. Be all and end all, another such compaction, has passed into the common language, yet it seems to be Shakespeare's coinage. If only time could be made to stop at the desired moment of the future. However, to be and to end are antithetical. They can only contradict each other. Time, as Hotspur said in his dying speech, must have a stop, though our experience of it does not. The act of murder cannot be an end. Nothing in time can, in that sense, be done. You can't have Hurley without Burley. Surcease does not imply the end of success, succession. No act is without success in this sense.
Now, as we said before with the Brooks critical analyses, we're playing games here of trying to see through the literature and understand specifically something beyond the literature. And in that case, here, notice that we will have Kermode looking specifically at linguistic structure, the language itself. Notice that one of the things right away that he's very interested in is the structure of the language as it relates to a back and forth, to kill or not to kill. Notice as well that Kermode will be utilizing others' ideas, starting with De Quincey and finishing with St. Augustine, as well as making some references possibly to Brooks as well. He will concentrate, of course, in this essay on the time in between. The witches, of course, have made the prophecy to Macbeth, and that he's deciding that he's going to go ahead and have to murder Duncan. And, of course, the actual killing of Duncan, that interim period, and the ways in which he's confused as to what it is that he should actually do. Now, of course, we've spoken at length already in earlier lectures about the paradoxes that are right away a part of this play. When shall we three meet again in thunder, lightning, or in rain? Offers one side of a choice, doesn't give us any possible good weather, and fair is foul, good is bad, and bad is good. Which creates, obviously, the central paradox, right? That is to say, there's always going to be an uncertainty in this play as to exactly how one should behave. On to page 392, the real question is not only who are you, but is any of this actually real? Of course, that notion of the real being authentic is central to appreciating the distinctions that we've already drawn in other lectures between Macbeth on the one hand and Banquo on the other. That is to say, which one of the two is a real man. Now, of course, this notion of authenticity and realness plays right into exactly what's being suggested in this essay. Of course, this rhythm of the interim that's spoken of on page 392 and following is going to be a powerful idea of the way Shakespeare uses language itself, that is to say, the very language that's spoken on stage, to try and play this one out. That uncertainty of should I stay or should I go from the Great Clash song, that notion that I'm not clear, I'm just not clear how it is I'm supposed to behave. Now, what we love about this essay is the way in which St. Augustine is brought in. Now, St. Augustine's Confessions we've spoken about many times in 303. We've given lectures on learnstrong.net about Confessions, and we've argued that that's really one of the central texts in the Western canon we have to pay attention to. I agree with the footnote here at the bottom of the page that it's hard to believe that Shakespeare didn't know about St. Augustine's Confessions, especially specific to this line that he quotes here about how long, tomorrow and tomorrow. It will be in the Confessions that St. Augustine will pray, give me constancy or discipline, but not yet. And you get that sense of the human condition. That is to say, I know that I need to be more disciplined, but I just can't do it quite yet. To that degree, of course, we joined the plays Macbeth and Hamlet together. You'll remember that it's Hamlet's to be or not to be that culminates with that which we would do, we should do, Claudius will say, when we would. Finally, the essay will end by making some references that are providing, that can only be understood with provided footnotes. Notice, first of all, he does make an observation at footnote 3 about the ideas of Kenneth Brooks in The Naked Babe that we listened to and studied prior. Notice the comment is here made that Brooks's methods are no longer in fashion. His emphasis on the structural importance of images has often been contested, but it is valid anywhere. It is valid, obviously, in relationship to Macbeth. There's also the comment made, a triple repetition of done gives a fairly commonplace, even proverbial saying, an intense local force. Footnote 4, the thing that's done in P. Tilley and a dictionary of the Proverbs in England. We have not yet done with these repetitions. Things without remedy should be without regard. What's done is done. What's done cannot be undone. And then finally, the Hilda Hulme observation as well. That is the way that this one finishes. And I'll let you read that one on your own and study through that one. Now, what is it that makes this kind of criticism so remarkable? Well, it looks at a text like Macbeth and it asks about the language of the play. And it challenges us to look not only at what Shakespeare says, but how Shakespeare says it. That is to say, we study the language even closer so that we're able to build an even richer understanding of the play itself. I hope that these two critical analyses pieces have challenged you to think more closely about really a brilliant play, Shakespeare's Macbeth. Thank you.